呢度恭祝大家喺新嘅一年身體健康，工作順利。我喺2017年7月5日第一次以行政長官身份出席立法會答問大會嘅時候，已經表明我十分重視行政立法嘅關係。基本法定明香港特別行政區行政同埋立法機關各自嘅職權。我尊重立法會嘅角色，亦都認同立法機關對行政機關嘅監察係良好管治重要嘅一環。喺本屆政府餘下1年多嘅任期，我期盼回復正常運作嘅立法會可以發揮制衡、監督同埋配合嘅作用，等我哋可以喺香港面對極嚴峻挑戰嘅時候，砥礪前行，重新出發，為經濟注入動力，為香港市民做實事。我感謝立法會喺上個月22日通過咗2020施政報告嘅致謝動議，但我更加留意嘅係喺1連3日嘅辯論裏邊，議員就住廣泛嘅政策範疇發表咗好多務實嘅意見。此外，我留意到內會主席李慧瓊議員喺最近多次同政務司司長嘅每週會議上，都如實反映咗部分議員對於政府表現嘅意見，包括個別局長回答議員口頭質詢嘅時候內容太過冗長，俾事務委員會討論嘅文件出得太遲，出席財務委員會或者公務小組會議嘅個別官員回答提問太虛。我時常都有睇立法會各會議嘅直播，對於議員反映嘅上述問題有一定嘅同感。我已經要求政務司司長作出提點、跟進改善同埋監督成效。儘管議員有一定嘅抱怨，但係過去3個月，我哋見到嘅係仍然喺疫情持續之下，議員係有效咁以事論事，處理政府嘅建議。我好高興知道喺對經濟同埋就業甚為重要嘅公務工程方面，公務小組已經完成審議涉及總承擔額大約970億元嘅撥款申請，包括24個新工程計劃同埋1項追加撥款，以及下一個財政年度嘅整體撥款。當中15個大約係
amounting to about $38 billion and block allocations of about $24 billion have been approved by the Finance Committee. The relevant projects could commence at once to inject impetus into the construction industry and other related industries in Hong Kong. On proposals about the establishment of the government, we have fully taken on board members' views, and after examination, we have decided to submit only one proposal for a permanent post of Court of Appeal judge in the judiciary in this legislative session. Other proposals on permanent directorate posts are either turned into time-limited supernumerary posts or are temporarily withdrawn. In total, there are proposals to create 20 supernumerary directorate posts and retain or create again 10 supernumerary directorate posts. I hope the revised proposals will be supported by members. Before I take questions from members, I would like to respond specifically to legislative proposals from members for which consensus has been reached in the past period. Some members have raised these proposals with me again when we met on the 29th of December last year. Article 73 of the Basic Law provides specifically for the important function of the Legislative Council to enact, amend, or repeal laws. The SAR government is duty-bound to give full consideration to members' views as we take forward any legislative exercise. My response today covers 5 legislative exercises. 1. Legislating for oath-taking requirements for public officers. Specified public officers must, in accordance with the law, swear to uphold the basic law and swear allegiance to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. This is the requirement under both Article 104 of the Basic Law, and Article 6 of the Hong Kong National Security Law. The requirement is entirely in line with the constitutional order of one country, two systems, and is fully justified in ensuring those who govern Hong Kong are patriots who love Hong Kong. The Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, promulgated on the 7th of November 2016, its interpretation of Article 104 to make clear that the oath-taking requirements cover matters such as the form and content of the oath, the manner when taking the oath, and so on. The interpretation also covers the legal responsibility to be borne in case of a breach of the oath. The government has completed a relevant study and considers that district councillors are specified public officers who should take the oaths in accordance with the law. The current legislative amendment exercise will provide for the requirement and the relevant arrangement. For other public officers, we will work on the issue as soon as possible. The drafting of the relevant bill is in the final stage. The Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs will be tabling the bill at the Council after the Chinese New Year. 2. Legislating for bringing in non-locally trained doctors. Our population is aging rapidly, and there is an escalated demand for healthcare services. It is an established fact that there is a shortage of doctors in the public healthcare system. The hospital authority is currently short of some 660 doctors. The Child Assessment Service, set up specifically by the Department of Health for identifying young children with special needs, has a staggering vacancy rate of some 40%. As a result, only about 60% of the cases could complete assessment in 6 months for children with needs. So only 60% of the cases could complete assessment in 6 months. In other words, for 40% of cases, the assessment could not be completed in 4 months. And if that's the case, the Social Welfare Department is unable to arrange preschool rehabilitation services. The situation is far from desirable. The SAR government has not overlooked the importance of training local talents. In the past decade or so, the number of places per year for medical students in the 2 hospitals have been increased by more than 100%, from 250 to the current level of 530. The government is actively considering increasing further the number of medical student places in the next annual cycle of the University Grants Committee. However, it takes time to train doctors, and the training capacity of medical schools could not be expanded infinitely. We cannot rely solely on local student places to address the shortage of doctors. It should be pointed out that before this Council amended the Medical Registration Ordinance in 1995, doctors trained in Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Singapore, and other places could register and practice in Hong Kong automatically. On average, the ratio of doctors automatically registered in Hong Kong to doctors trained locally per year was 1.2 to 1. In other words, for every doctor we trained locally, we brought in at least 1 non-locally trained doctors. The total supply of doctors was boosted, and the local talent pool was enriched. Dr. Margaret Chan, former WHO Director General and Director of Health, Professor Arthur Lee, former Vice Chancellor and Dean of Medicine of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and Professor Gabriel Leung, Dean of Medicine of the University of Hong Kong, are all non-locally trained doctors who have served in Hong Kong for years. After referring to overseas experience, the SAR government has decided to introduce the Medical Registration Amendment Bill to this Council in this legislative session. The bill will provide for a new arrangement to allow more non-locally trained doctors who are qualified to come to practice in Hong Kong, as we strive to ensure the quality of medical services and address the shortage of doctors in the public sector. With the consent of the Executive Council, the legislative proposals contain 3 key elements. Firstly, non-locally trained doctors to be brought in must be permanent residents of Hong Kong. Secondly, applicants must be graduates of recognized non-local medical schools and must have the qualifications to register as a doctor or a specialist at where they graduated. Thirdly, all successful applicants must work in the public healthcare system for a prolonged period. They are not allowed to go into private practice, as the objective is to address the shortage of doctors in the public sector. The Secretary for Food and Health will further explain the legislative framework of the proposal at a meeting of the panel on health services tomorrow. I have invited the two doctors in the Executive Council, that is Professor Arthur Lee and Dr. Lam Ching Choi, to help to explain the proposal to the public and to secure the support of doctors in the public and private sectors.
3. Legislating for tenancy control of subdivided units. After months of discussions and studies, the Task Force for the Study of Subdivided Units in principle agreed that the government should exercise appropriate regulation on tenancy of SDUs to protect grassroots tenants while also safeguarding the interests of owners. The task force will strive to submit a report to the government by the end of March. The Transport and Housing Bureau at the recent LegCo panel on housing meeting on the 1st of February listened to the legislative proposals from members. The Secretary for Transport and Housing plans to table a bill that takes into account recommendations of the task force and views of legislators. Meanwhile, to protect tenants from being overcharged by their landlords for the use of water, I have provided written consent under Article 74 of the Basic Law for Ms. Alice Mack to introduce a private bill to amend certain provisions in the waterworks regulations such that owners may only collect water charges payable under Regulation 46. I hope such move reflects my respect for the constitutional function of LegCo and my willingness to take on board members' proposals. 4. Legislating for the improvement of fire safety in old buildings. The safety and fire hazards of old buildings is an issue of much interest in our society. When I was Secretary for Development, different measures were introduced to deal with dilapidated buildings, such as Operation Building Bright. In terms of improving the fire safety of old buildings, the Fire Safety Buildings Ordinance came into operation in 2007 to bring the fire safety standards of composite and domestic buildings constructed in or before 1987 to modern standards. In the past 10 years or so, the Fire Services Department and Buildings Department have been enforcing the regulations while providing technical and financial assistance to the owners of old buildings, including setting up a $5.5 billion fire safety improvement works subsidy scheme. However, due to the nature of owners of old buildings and constraints in their management and coordination capabilities, a number of buildings, such as 3 new buildings, are yet to fulfill requirements under the ordinance. So far, the FSD and BD have completed inspection of almost 10,000 target buildings and issued more than 280,000 fire safety directions, of which about 60% are yet to be fulfilled or followed up upon. With regards to the building department's experience in building safety, the government agreed that there's a need to enhance the current legislative framework and accepted members' call to consider amending the ordinance to empower the FSD and BD to carry out fire safety improvement works on behalf of owners of old buildings who are incapable of complying with the ordinance and to recover the works costs from them upon completion. However, I must stress that there is a fundamental difference between improving between the fire safety improvement works and removing illegal building works with safety concerns. We will draw reference from the existing buildings ordinance and the relevant mechanisms and implementation and seek to tackle the relevant legal and enforcement issues. The Secretary for Security would provide steer on the relevant legislative exercise, and hopefully public consultation would be conducted at the latter half of the year in order to establish an appropriate mechanism, amend the legislation, and authorize the relevant departments for the work. 5. Legislation to crack down on acts such as privacy invasion and spread of hate and discriminatory speech and false information. Rapid technological development brings convenience to the people, but on the other hand, it gave rise to or exacerbated acts that amount to privacy invasion or disruption of social order. In the past 2 years, social turmoil and COVID-19 led to issues on the internet, especially among social media. We saw acts such as doxing, making hate and discriminatory speech, and disseminating fake news. The fact is, such phenomena were not exclusive to Hong Kong. Governments around the world have resorted to legislative or administrative means to tackle the relevant issues. Since the issues cover many areas and are rather sensitive, we would look at the experience and approach adopted in other countries and places, and it would be difficult to formulate a complete legislative proposal within a short time. But we will give priority to the more imminent issues such as doxing activities. As the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data said on the 28th of January, doxing is akin to weaponizing personal data and should not be taken lightly. She also quoted court judgments which indicated the far-reaching consequences on victims of doxing. We would deal with the issue of doxing through enforcement and legislative amendments. In terms of enforcement, since June 2019, the Office of the PCPD has referred more than 1,460 cases of alleged breach of the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance to the police for criminal investigation and possible prosecution, and the office also referred 57 cases of alleged breach of injunction order to the DOJ. In terms of legislative amendment, the CMAB and the Office of the PCPD have been actively following up on the amendment of the PDPO, including criminalizing doxing relating acts, and to empower the Commissioner's statutory powers to demand social media platforms or websites to remove the alleged contents. And a questionnaire published by the office last week pointed out that at least 2/3 of the respondents are supportive of the amendment to the PDPO, and the goal of the CMAB is to complete the relevant drafting work within the current legislative year and table the bill into LegCo. Another related issue to protection of privacy is the use of public registers. Currently, public registers held by different government departments have been maintained for years and are available for inspection for different reasons and objectives. And the main idea is to provide convenience to the public and service users for specific purposes such as property, vehicle, and company transactions. Given the high level of concern shown by the society on protecting personal data privacy, and given the acts of doxing in recent years in which personal data has been obtained through inspection of registers, different government departments are currently reviewing the legal requirements and administrative arrangements for the public registers maintained in order to balance the rights of different parties, and if necessary, adjustments will be made. Soon, legislative amendments might be made if necessary in order to achieve the goal of allowing public inspection while protecting personal data privacy. President, members, I reported 5 important areas of legislative work involving different policy areas, and when the bills are introduced into LegCo, the scrutiny work for members will be substantial. I would demand my colleagues to fully support the work of LegCo so that these constitutionally significant or livelihood-related bills could be passed in a timely manner. Next Friday would be the first day of the new Lunar New Year, and I wish you all success and health in the new year of the Ox. And I urge members of the public to refrain from gatherings and instead enjoy a relatively quiet Lunar New Year. By working together, we can step out of the epidemic and welcome a healthy and vibrant New Year. Thank you very much.
The Chief Executive will now answer questions from members. 20 members have pressed the button to indicate they wish to speak. Now, can I please ask members to be succinct in asking questions? Please do not give your comments. Now, after the Chief Executive has answered the question asked by a member, the member may forthwith ask a such supplementary question on her question. Ms. Carrie Lam, Chief Executive, I'm glad to hear from your opening remarks just now and from the last Chief Executive's Chief Answer and Question session, you said you valued very much good relationship between the executive and the legislature because that's important for good governance. And I've also heard the overall direction that you've depicted in your opening remarks. But it seems that you have left out one aspect. In the 3-day debate, many members from different political parties have asked you to think out of the box in supporting the unemployed. So please, on employment assistance, urge the relevant policy bureau to think out of the box. Now, I'd like to ask about vaccines. The Medical School of Medicine of Hong Kong University has done a survey on people's willingness to take the vaccine. It was 63.2% in November. Now it's only 45.9% in January. That's the percentage of people who wants to take the vaccine, so the percentage dropped. Now, on the mainland, 88.6% of those surveyed indicate a willingness to take the vaccine. In the US, 70%, UK, 70%, South Korea, over 70%, even in France is 59%. So 49.5% of the people who are willing to take the vaccine is actually an alarm for us. We don't want there to be a confidence crisis in the vaccination program. So how do we boost the confidence of the public in taking the vaccine? I think that's the first priority task of your government. So my question for the Chief Executive and your team is, and also, for your experts, what plans do they have to boost the confidence of the public in taking the vaccine? You said that you have asked the central authorities to allow the early supply of Sinopharm vaccines to Hong Kong because people in Hong Kong are more confident in an inactivated virus vaccine. So do you think that if you could procure or secure the early supply of Sinopharm vaccines would help to instill confidence in the public in taking the vaccine? Chief Executive, thank you. Ms. Carrie Lam. Yes, vaccine is a matter of immense concern to us. Well, we haven't just started our work on procuring vaccines in recent months. As you know, right from the very beginning of the pandemic, we all knew that if there was not any effective if there was no development of effective vaccines and wide use of vaccines, there's no way we could put the epidemic under control. So that's why at a time we had to proceed in confidence on reaching advanced procurements and agreements with advanced purchase agreements with different parties. Now we managed to secure supply from 3 platforms of 7.5 million doses each. So that's enough for the use of the entire population in Hong Kong. And now we're in the stage of authorizing emergency use of vaccines. That's one issue. Another issue is the delivery of vaccines to Hong Kong. So we're actively following up on these 2 areas of work. Now, Ms. Carrie Lam has expressed concern about confidence. It's true from many survey findings. We could see that Hong Kong has a lower take-up rate for the vaccines, it seems, in terms of confidence. So, but I'm sure as we pursue our work, we will be able to boost confidence. So we are also working on publicity and promotion. We have been, making publicity and promotion on scientific facts of vaccines, and we launched a campaign on Facebook and so on. So please refer the public to the short videos we produce on the importance of these vaccines. Another issue, of course, is the efficacy of vaccines. Now, under CAP 599K, we have a framework for authorizing emergency use of vaccines, and that would help to boost the public confidence. Of course, to do that, we need to rely on data. Now, the experts have already evaluated one vaccine has been authorized for use by the Secretary for Food and Health. Now, the third thing we have to consider is, of course, how the vaccine could be taken conveniently and safely. So the Secretary for Civil Service and the Secretary for Food and Health have been chairing a working task force for some time now. And so you've been hearing about plans to set up community vaccination centers staffed by healthcare workers. So after people take the vaccine, they may have to stay there for a short while to take a rest and see if there's any reaction to the vaccine. So we are proceeding with all such efforts to boost public confidence in vaccines. Now, people in Hong Kong, of course, are pragmatic. If they take the vaccine, what benefit would they get? Of course, the most important thing is in future, if they want to travel either to the mainland or to other countries, what is the role of vaccination in this process? We can't say for sure because we have to look at the situation around the world. But for sure, it's better to take the vaccine and not to take it, because there will be an added layer of protection. Now, for the Chinese central authorities, of course, they are very much concerned about the epidemic in Hong Kong. Now, when we ask for support from the central authorities, they would never hesitate to help us. I won't repeat the details because they've been covered. But about delivery of vaccines to Hong Kong, the central authorities are now helping us with the relevant coordination work upon our request. So here I would like to thank the central authorities again for their support. Mr. Ali. Now, I think it's most important that you boost the public confidence in taking the vaccine. Otherwise, there won't be a high vaccination take-up rate, and the vaccine is not going to work. On Sunday, the DB has started a signature campaign for the introduction of some Sinopharm vaccines. In one day, we received some 75,000 signatures that show people in Hong Kong are confident in the Sinopharm vaccine. So I hope you will bring that in as soon as possible. And then Professor Zhong Nanshan has said recently for the Sinopharm and the Sinovac vaccines, over 22.7 million people on the mainland have taken the vaccine, so they are safe, and shows that people there are confident in these vaccines. So do you think you'll be able to make an announcement this month so people know for sure that they will have the option of taking Chinese-made vaccines? Well, Chief Executive, now I can't say for sure when the announcement could be made, but I can tell you progress is being made. We are grateful to your party and others for doing surveys, so we learn about the sentiment of the public. But, when it comes to procuring mainland vaccines, we want to do it in a non-political manner, because everything has been politicized in Hong Kong in recent years, and people have been taking advantage of these issues to stir up political issues. So we want to make sure that we procure vaccines in an objective and scientific manner, and we want to make sure the vaccines are safe and so on. But anyway, if there's any progress on vaccine procurement, we'll certainly make an announcement to the public at the first instance.
Mr. Paul Chair, the chief executives of Hong Kong and Macau reported their work to the Central People's Government, and the chief executive of Macau's work has been highly acclaimed. So this is a insinuation of the performance of the chief executive. In Macau, administrative of vaccines would take place very soon, whereas in Hong Kong, we are lagging behind. Cat 599K could be amended. It should not be too conservative. We must observe one country, two systems, but in terms of fighting the epidemic, Hong Kong should not be that conservative. We should speed up our work. This is the question asked by many people. In terms of alleviation measures, Macau just announced that the government would provide support to the people as much as they could. And in Hong Kong, we received a windfall of some $190 billion, And despite the suggestions we offered to the Financial Secretary, no proposals for alleviation have been offered by the government. So in terms of fighting the epidemic and alleviating livelihoods, could the government do more or be more aggressive? And operations have been conducted in different districts despite little results. Chief Executive, thank you very much for the question. Hong Kong is a diversified society, and in recent years, we saw cases from or views of people, of different people, and many acts have been made political. In terms of vaccination, they should be administered as far as possible. But if we are not careful, this issue could become another political one that could be manipulated by certain people. And at the end, the people of Hong Kong would suffer. So this is not about being conservative or not. This is the reality we are facing. I hope Mr. Chair acknowledges that. In terms of our efforts in fighting the epidemic, we have constantly reinforced our work. Looking back, some measures might have been rolled out sooner, and this is something I would not deny. However, COVID-19 is completely new to us, and different countries are learning along their way. So as a whole, we must go as we learn. You pointed out that operations were carried out to little effect. I believe you were referring to the restriction testing declarations in different districts without any confirmed cases found. So that could be a good sign. That shows that the trend is on the down. And this is exactly our goal. We want to find out about the existence of silent transmission in this community. So the number of confirmed cases found is not the only indicator to our efforts. Such operations will require a lot of manpower, and we have to deploy officers from the Architectural Services Department and not only from the health authorities and discipline forces. Like we said before, ahead of Lunar New Year, we hope to ascertain the situation in different districts. In terms of unemployment and unemployment assistance, this is of much interest to me. The current unemployment of 6% is expected to get a little worse. And with the easing of the epidemic and relaxation of social distancing measures, and with the resumption of the flow of people between two places, we believe we will see more economic activities, but this would take some time. Today, I would not comment on the alleviation measures because in less than 3 weeks, the Financial Secretary will deliver his budget, and he has been taking in views from different parties. And having considered different circumstances such as the needs of the people, the economic situation, etc., the FS would deliver a response to LegCo. Mr. Paul Chair. The pandemic has exposed governments around the world. Hong Kong has not done particularly poorly, but Macau has a zero fatality record, and this is really much to envy. The chief executive talked about 5 main areas of legislative work, and I agree with the bulk of them. but most of them are relating to tightening up certain pieces of legislation. I believe we should be conservative or prudent, but now we should really focus on vaccination. And in this regard, the government should do more, and we should not fall further behind. I think testing now is not the time for testing. We should really focus our efforts on vaccination. Chief Executive, I agree with such strategy. But since we are yet to begin administration of vaccines, we would continue with our testing efforts. To be frank, carrying out community testing and vaccination at the same time is rather difficult, but we are taking forward our work on a gradual basis. Mr. Wilson, given the grave situation with the epidemic, most Hong Kong people are happy to support the government's measures such as lockdown and vaccination exercise. The goal is to achieve 0 cases in Hong Kong so that the borders could be reopened and employment could be boosted. Chief Executive, from my visits to different districts, I saw that the design and maintenance of drainage pipes was a main reason for the outbreak. In SARS in 2003, the government came up with drainage improvement works and to better educate the public on the maintenance of pipes. However, at that time, there were no subdivided units, 3 new buildings, and the buildings were not that old at that time. And at recent times, due to the design of light wells, I saw that the risk of transmission has escalated. Many people are concerned about the maintenance of pipes, and I'd like to show you a few photos. The photo on the left, on my left, shows pipes in public housing estates, and on the right, these are pipes of those living in inadequate housing or SDUs. And there's a proposal to offer checks of pipes for 18 months. I hope this could be implemented as soon as possible. At private properties, 3 new buildings, and SDUs, no work has been earmarked. Chief Executive, can you be proactive in urging the Buildings Department to carry out a study, perform checks, and come up with a plan to follow up on issues with pipes in private properties? Chief Executive, thank you very much. Mr. Orr has always been following up on issues in old buildings, and I appreciate that. And the government has done a lot in supporting the maintenance of these old buildings. And one of the areas of work I outlined today is about the fire safety of old buildings. I was Secretary for Development for 5 years in terms of building maintenance, mandatory checks, and the clearance of unauthorized building works. The government did a lot. But the fact is there's room for improvement with the maintenance of buildings in Hong Kong. And part of that lies with the owners as well. So very often we would have to take out mandatory measures and offer financial and technical assistance in the meantime. So in terms of building safety and unauthorized building works, I believe we have achieved results over the past 10 years or so. In terms of the fire safety laws, apart from offering financial and technical assistance, we would refine our legislative framework. And at recent times, we saw that pipes are an issue, and this is something we would work on. For private buildings, it would be difficult to carry out works because we would have to enter the premises. For PLH estates, the housing department could enter and inspect whether the pipe connections are proper, but the work would be difficult for private residential buildings. But if there are issues with pipes in the facades of the building, I believe the Secretary for Development is performing a study already with a view to offering appropriate measures.
Mr. Wilson, thank you. Well, yes, the government, the public can see you've been working hard, and we give you a like for that. But then, with the drainage pipe system, you have to act quickly to improve matters. Now, I'd like to give you a suggestion. The DAB and I would like to you to take a longer-term view. Maybe you could ask the Policy Bureau or engage universities to conduct studies. So for drainage pipe systems in private building, you could come up with a long-term policy on, say, drawing up guidelines and so on to address the drainage pipe problems. Could you do that, please? Chief Executive. Now, we always support relying on science to resolve social issues. Definitely will take on board your suggestion. We will work with the relevant institutions such as universities or research organizations. We work with them to see how we could make use of technology to resolve such matters. Thank you. May I appeal to members again to be short and succinct in their questions. Dr. Loy Kwok. Now, we need basic necessities. That's what people need, and it is also a factor in determining whether a city is livable. But then in Hong Kong, instead of talking about clothing, we care more about healthcare services now. And then I also want to talk about other aspects of basic necessities, such as transportation. Because if we want Hong Kong to be a livable city, we have to pay attention to public transport infrastructure. In new development areas, transport infrastructure always lags behind the residential intake. So that's why I've asked for the government to do the fourth comprehensive transport study. I'm glad to see that in the policy address this year, the Chief Executive will proceed with the CTS. And also to proceed with study on the railway system. Now, the Railway Development Strategy 2014 laid down 7 routes, and they were supposed to be completed by 2031. The Tuen Mun line was supposed to be commissioned next year, but we know there's been delay. I've been pursuing this with the government for years, and it's only after 6 years that the government has given a green light to the Tuen Mun line and another line. For the Northern Line and the commissioning of the Kwu Tung Station, it will be in 2018 or 2023. And it will only serve the new population starting from 2023. For the phase 1 of Northern Link, that is Kwu Tung Station, it will only be completed in 27 when people move in 2023. And for the second phase, it will only be completed by 2034. That's a delay of 11 years compared to the target in the Railways Development Strategy. So this is really this really shows the government has been indecisive in taking actions. So I want to ask the Chief Executive whether the government will review these 7 projects and try to catch up with with the progress and make up for the time lost. Chief Executive. Well, I share the views of Dr. Low. For urban design in Hong Kong, we should start with transport infrastructure. Especially now we are developing new land for housing development, so it's all the more important that we first have the public transport infrastructure in place. So that's how we now consider how we invest in infrastructure projects first. We won't look at what is the population intake or how many people need to travel or how congested roads are before we provide additional transport infrastructure. No, we don't do that anymore. So in terms of strategy, we actually seeing eye to eye with Dr. Loy Kwok on putting transport infrastructure first. Now it's a matter of how we could speed things up. I have to lament the fact that sometimes as we try to move quicker, we end up going slower. Now people are saying there's a delay in the railway projects, probably because we were too ambitious. We have planned too many railway projects. There are now 5 railway projects ongoing, and so it's probably an onerous burden on the relevant company. So in the past 3 years, the MTRCL has been trying to sort out problems. The government has to set up, they have to set up experts committee and so on to look at the various problems associated with the project. So that's why we have to be cautious when we decide on new projects. I can't promise that I'll proceed with all 7 projects in one go. Now we have promised that we'll start with the Northern Line, the Two Moon Line, and also the Southern Island South Line to tie in with the invigorating Island South project. I totally agree for the Northern Line. We have to be careful. Maybe yes, we were not. We did make some assessment wrong, and so. We have to be careful now because with this line we're able to make available large pockets of land for development. So we want to speed up the Northern Link project. Now for Kutong Station, we hope that it will be ready when the population moves in. And then for the next phase, that is linking the Northern Link to the West Rail Line, we need to speed things up there. I have personally talked to the Chairman and the Chief Executive of the MTRCL. I've asked them to try to speed up the projects. So I'll continue to monitor such work. Dr. Lomoy Kwok. I'm grateful to the Chief Executive for her positive response. It's true in the past, transport infrastructure planning was demand-led. Now I've heard your response. So my further question is, in future, would you really adopt a planning strategy of infrastructure projects being demand-led in supporting development of certain areas? For example, we've been talking about the Two Moon Link for a long time. And also, you should provide more room for development on top of stations. That's important too. I hope you will adjust your strategy so that we will have the roads ready, and then when people move in, they will bring with them wealth to the area. Now, for the artificial islands reclamation project, there's land out tomorrow. You see many of the projects at this stage are transport infrastructure projects. The cost of the reclamation itself isn't that high, but then there are many associated works projects on infrastructure, roads, and so on. So we will continue to work in this direction in follow-up on all these projects. Thank you. Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, President. Good morning, Chief Executive. Now, members mentioned various social issues. The Chief Executive mentioned 5 legislative exercise and your past work. As soon as you speak, probably the media reports will be very different than what you said. Now, people have been saying that perhaps you've not been doing a good job with public relations since you assumed the office, but then you may not be able to control certain issues. For example, maybe some media organizations want the higher circulation rate, so they may go a bit beyond what the scope. But then we have a public broadcaster. The public broadcaster is there supposed to explain things clearly to the public. For example, they can explain the complex figures in a simple manner to the public. But that's what a public broadcaster is supposed to do. But then we found that the public broadcaster has made various mistakes. The biggest incident is the Xi Jinping incident. That is, Xi Jinping, it says that it reported that Xi Jinping proposes multilateralism so that we will have Cold War, and we could cause rifts in the well, when it's not supposed to mean that. So maybe the reporters are of a poor standard, they don't understand Chinese or whatever. And then recently, there's a headline news that is they didn't report the facts, so they could smear the police. And then for the there's the Hong Kong connection program, they again made up information. And a very recent incident is that when that's the specified restricted area in Jordan, they reported they gave a report that the Hong Kong government gave people canned food but not the can openers. And then people were saying, well, these cans actually could be opened easily just with a pull rein. So the RTHK is a public broadcaster, is using public funds. Some of the staff members are actually civil servants. It's because it's difficult to dismiss civil servants. That's why they know that they can make mistakes and they won't be punished. It's not like if they're in a private organization, they could be dismissed right away. No, you could choose not to reply. You may just mention the charter and say that we will follow the charter. So my question is this, rather. Now, with public administration, the very fundamental issue is to try to get to the roots of problems. They say for this can opener report, there are 4 cans with the pouring arrangement, 3 of them the pouring arrangement. Then they instead on the photo they just show the back of the cans, and so and then they say eventually it's because they just took the reports on a newspaper. That newspaper made an apology, but then the RTHK actually published a statement to condemn people for criticizing them. So do you not see a problem with this? Are you going to follow up on that?
主席，多謝何議。
Thank you very much for the question from Mr. Ho on the issues relating to RTHK. First of all, I'd like to make clear my stance. My stance is that there's certainly room for improvement in the RTHK. In the 2020 policy address, I indicated that there are many issues that must be rectified in Hong Kong, but this would not happen overnight. It requires commitment, and this is a process we must go through. As a public broadcaster and government department, in less than 2 years, there were 7 substantiated complaints against RTHK. 1 serious warning and 3 warnings were issued, and this is certainly unacceptable. This is unacceptable for any government department. And as such, improvements must be made, and the process had started. In July last year, a team was deployed, and it was headed by Mrs. Ting, who used to be with the Chief Executive's office, and 6 months' time were given, and a report is due very soon. Once the report is available, the government would follow up and on the improvement needed for RTHK. Thank you very much. I'm happy to hear that the Chief Executive has cited the relevant work in recent days. But in terms of the establishment or the civil service establishment, a lot of work is needed. I talked about a number of incidents, for instance, the one involving presidency and how his speech was skewed, and the problem with the food cans. Improvements should be made immediately. I don't know how much longer we have to wait. If the government has been working hard to fight the epidemic, and at the end they are being sold short by RTHK, when are you going to reinstill public confidence in the government? Without public confidence, everything else would be in vain. So this is about efficiency or speed. Chief Executive, for the so-called minor incidents, they would all be looked into, and after that they would be followed up upon. I believe Mr. Edward Yao has launched investigation into these incidents, but according to the RTHK Charter, there is a role known as Chief Editor. I hope the chief editor would express his stance on such incidents, but I'm still waiting. Mr. Holden Chow. Chief Executive, In terms of the mandatory tests in recent lockdowns, I believe the experience has improved with experience, including Ho Choi building in Yuen Long and the lockdown last night. Overall, the operations were orderly, and I'd like to thank the relevant departments and the police force. Chief Executive, I understand you spent a lot of efforts in offering financial or economic support, but without unemployment assistance, the situation is rather frustrating. Those who deserve help are not receiving help, while those who do not need help are getting a lot of money, such as the big supermarkets. There are employers who are not sharing the subsidies with their employees. This is the reality. When I asked a question at LegCo earlier, for those making less than $9,000 a month, according to the Census and Statistics Department, the unemployment size is 70,000, and we have another 9,000 people who are underemployed. So altogether, the total is less than 100,000. If we give them $6,000 a month for 6 months, well, this is a finite sum that you could allocate. I believe the government can afford to offer this sum in order to alleviate the plight of the grassroots. Chief Executive. In terms of better supporting the needs of the unemployed, we have heard views from different members. Our officers have explained on different occasions that any form of unemployment assistance that is not backed is not sustainable. You might say that this is only a temporary 6-month assistance and you can stop it after that. But as we all know, practically speaking, this might not be feasible. And like I said earlier today, I would not focus on financial support or economic measures because the budget would be delivered in less than 3 weeks. And the financial secretary would consider a host of factors in coming up with the measures, and I believe the FS has heard those views. Mr. Holden Chow, any follow-up questions? Chief Executive, you said you would not talk about economic or financial support, but these are indeed the needs of our people, especially the grassroots. I hope you could convey such message. Mr. Ronnie Chan, thank you. Chief Executive, I have always supported the development of Hong Kong into a smart city. In October last year, the IM Smart platform was rolled out to allow members of the public to access online services through mobile apps. And I have signed up for the IM Smart platform, and many public services and utilities have been integrated, such as online identity card, personalized notifications, etc. But if we are to activate the digital signature function to renew car license plates, etc., I would have to visit any one of the post offices in Hong Kong with my Hong Kong identity card for the IM Smart platform. And photo ID must be provided to verify our identity, and users are required to bring their Hong Kong identity cards to post offices, and they would have to queue up. And very often we see very long queues at post offices due to the shortened operating hours, and this is a very poor experience for users. Nowadays, people can open bank accounts online. So for IM Smart, a 2-step registration is still needed, and I believe this would discourage people from using it. Chief Executive, since the goal of I Am Smart seeks to develop Hong Kong into a smart city, our consideration should be based on the user's experience in order to encourage take-up. For the digital signature function, would it be refined such that it could be tied in with the registration? Chief Executive. Thank you, President.
Well, we launched I Am Smart in December. Thank you for telling people about that. Yes, where we are trying to do more to facilitate the public through applied technology. On digital signature, there are certain legal requirements in accordance with the Electronic Transactions Ordinance. Now, people have to apply for digital certificates to serve as a digital signature, and that requires a stringent process. There has to be face-to-face verification of the identity of the applicants. So when it comes to registering for I Am Smart Plus, there's only one requirement for face-to-face verification, so it's only just once. After that, you'll be able to use I Am Smart Plus freely. So the current arrangement is for those who are interested, they could go to the post office. Well, there are 121 post offices where you could verify your identity. In coming months, we'll see whether we could add additional locations for such verification purpose. For example, we're soon going to have the community vaccination centers in the 18 districts. Maybe after people take the vaccine, they have to stay there for 10, 20 minutes. They have nothing else to do. Maybe we could consider setting up counters there so people could take advantage of that gap to complete the verification process, and then they could, when they have registered for the I Am Smart Plus, it will be much easier for them to make use of all the online services. Mr. Ronick Chen, Chief Executive, I'm glad to hear that you will continue to improve the service. But actually, I found that the government never cares about the user's experience after they've launched various services. They have to wait till there are different voices in the community before they would consider improvement. So perhaps under the Office on a Policy coordination office, you could recruit some contract staff and ask them to try the different government services, and then they could tell you about the user's experience, and then improvement could be made. So I hope you consider that. That is under the Policy Innovation and Coordination Office, you do that. Thank you, Chief Executive. Now, yes, we have business facilitation committees under different policy bureaus that's to tell us how we could facilitate businesses. And Mr. Ronick Chen is suggesting either a focus group or designating a certain office to test the different government services, and so we learn about users' experience. Thank you. Mr. Horace Cheung, Chief Executive. Just now, Mr. Stephen Ho mentioned the RTHK incident. I wonder if you are aware of a recent case too. Perhaps I could take this opportunity to tell you about it. Now, when President Xi Jinping addressed the World Economic Forum online, there was a report from the Radio Hong Kong, and actually is enraging. That report is supposed to be about President Xi Jinping promoting multilateralism. Because we don't do that, it will only cause rifts in the world. But then instead, the RTHK reported it the other way around. That is, President Xi Jinping wanted to promote multilateralism so we could cause rift in the world by promoting Cold War. So they actually turned the report the other way around, but after an hour, of course, they made corrections. But then this instance shows that there are problems with RTHK, and we have to consider that, tackle that seriously. Now, Mr. Wilson all said that you have to act quickly so we could have a better, environment, a community for all. But here for RTHK, you need to act quickly too. Now, Chief Executive, you mentioned the introduction of non-locally trained doctors in your opening remarks. I'm glad that you are responding to the views of this council and the community, and you're taking a bold step to relax the requirement for permanent residents of Hong Kong to come back to Hong Kong to practice in medicine. Yes, there is shortage of doctors in the public sector. I've looked at figures. Kowloon East cluster, eye specialist. The wait for service there is 174 weeks. And now you have, poured in substantial resources in the Department of Health to try to on the child assessment service, but you're not able to hire enough doctors, so children are not taken care of during the vital development stage. Now, with this new measure of introducing non-locally trained doctors, probably you're not able to fill all the vacancies at the child assessment service quick enough, but still people will welcome the move. But I'm sure some doctors won't welcome it. They may say that in Hong Kong, we can't sacrifice the medical standards of doctors, and at the end the government may then back down. Now, of course, Hong Kong doctors are well trained and they are competent, but it doesn't mean that doctors trained overseas are not good doctors. Look at Singapore, our competitor. They have been bringing in doctors trained from other places to Singapore to address their shortage. In 2017, the number of overseas trained doctors in Singapore amounted to 42% of the total. So if we don't bring in more doctors, patients will suffer. And then for our next generation, they'll have to pay a price because we have a shortage of doctors. So Chief Executive, can you promise this? Within your term, you will certainly make sure that the important step you announced today would become reality. Chief Executive. Thank you, Mr. Horace Cheung, for supporting our measure to bring in non-locally trained doctors. Well, I am very much committed to this position, and it's been the case for a long time. You can check my past records. Whenever I gave speeches to doctors, like the graduation ceremony of universities or at talks and so on, I've been saying the same thing. So we are very much committed to this task, and I'm grateful. Hope I will get the support of members. Now, for the proposed legislative framework, this is not that bold, really. We could go even further, but that's exactly because we have to consider the views of different doctors locally. And now I'm saying that this legislative framework is not that bold because for the first condition, applicants must be permanent residents. In the UK, US, Australia, there are people studying medicine. They are permanent residents here. They may want to come back. Now, there's been an improvement to the limited registration scheme, and the Secretary for Food and Health have visited these countries and talked to medical students there, and they all expressed an interest to come back. So that's why, as I said in November, first we'll allow the sons and daughters for Hong Kong who've completed their medical studies and who've become qualified to come back to practice in Hong Kong. That's the first batch we are considering. And we hope by doing so there won't be too much opposition from the local medical sector. I appeal to doctors in the public sector in particular to support this move, because this will benefit doctors working there. Now, we're talking about several hundred more doctors coming to help out with the workload. Of course, that means everyone will have a lesser workload. And also, in the Department of Health, there is a serious shortage of doctors. Now, when we talk about shortage of doctors, we always focus on the hospital authority, but actually in the Department of Health, there is a vacancy rate of 13.2% as at the end of 2020. So we could have 13% more doctors working at the Department of Health for us to improve the various services, but we couldn't get those doctors. Especially, I mentioned the child assessment service. Now, it's important that children are given the needed services during their vital development stage. We want to have zero waiting time, but we're not able to hire enough doctors. Now, Dr. Law Chi Kwong has come up with a way. That is when before the children go through assessment, if we spot any problems, say with kindergarten pupils, we'll start providing them with services first. But then it's important that children receive the child assessment. Otherwise, they will miss out on the vital rehabilitation stage, and then they will face various problems. That's why I strongly, sincerely appeal to the medical sector in Hong Kong to support this exercise. Now, when we have this legislative framework and the ordinance in place, then we're able to bring back permanent residents of Hong Kong to come back and practice here, and that will help us to address the problem. So we are strongly committed. We are not going to back down. So I hope this council will support us. Allow me to say this too. Now, we have a legislative council that's more or less resumed normal. So then we're able to get things done. If that's not the case, we will not be able to propose these bold measures that will benefit the community. Now, for these 5 legislative exercises I've mentioned, now if it's still the Legislative Council like last year, we would not dare to propose at least 3 of the proposed exercises, because we won't even be able to have meetings, say, about the legislation on oath taking. So we want the legislature to, exercise check and balance functions of government and monitor our work, and we want this council to, be able to function normally and work for the good of the public. I hope you will support our proposal. Now, we could introduce this bill within this legislative session, but it's up to you how long you take to scrutinize it.
Mr. Horace Chang. Mr. Luk Chung Hung, Chief Executive, I hope you realize that given the epidemic, the workers were the ones affected the most in terms of unemployment assistance. The labor sector as well as legislators have been urging yourself and Dr. Law Chi Kwong to do something. But my impression that it's all empty talk from your side, but there's nothing concrete so far when it comes to action. The unemployment rate is now at 6.4%, and even that is a conservative figure from the government. And in terms of the number of CSSA recipients receiving unemployment aid, it only consists of about 1/3. So it shows that a lot of people could not benefit. Many workers are complaining that their bank accounts have gone to zero before the number of infections go to zero. And $80 billion have been spent on the employment support scheme. The FTU has come up with a proposal capped at $15 billion. And you said that such proposal is not sustainable. We would propose an exit mechanism. When unemployment falls to a specific percentage, this temporary unemployment assistance scheme would end. And in terms of a possible regular unemployment aid, that could be discussed further at that time. So with an exit mechanism in place, would the government consider the idea of an unemployment assistance? And in terms of creating jobs, the government announced that 30,000 jobs will be created, but only about half were created. During SARS, we saw some 70,000 temporary jobs. So in terms of epidemic control, frontline jobs, tourism, etc. Can more jobs be created for the people? So on one hand, you can offer assistance, and on the other, you should create jobs. Mr. Tenka Peel, a member of the Labour Advisory Board, invited Dr. Lo Chi Kwong to engage in a public debate. Through a debate, we hope to find a way out to alleviate unemployment. Chief Executive, would you urge Dr. Lo Chi Kwong to accept our invitation? It's not about winners or losers. We just want to engage in a meaningful debate. Thank you very much. As for your final point, I believe Dr. Law would not be against this idea when it comes to a debate. With debate, we can sort out a lot of arguments, and perhaps we can have a debate online given the epidemic. And when it comes to unemployment assistance, I do not wish to comment on that today because we would have to consider different factors, but we do agree with the direction of creating jobs. It is important to create jobs, even short-term jobs for the unemployed. And like myself and Dr. Law said before, we have been looking at the requirement on the number of hours under working family allowance so that people could take up part-time jobs or sporadic jobs and still be included in the working family allowance and the relevant subsidies. So in terms of creating employment, we would continue to work hard. If more jobs could be created, that's what we would do. Under the 31,000 jobs under the anti-epidemic fund, about half have been filled, and the number is about 14,000. And I agree that we should speed up our efforts. Departments who have been allocated a quota should roll out the jobs as soon as possible. As for the youth employment scheme of the Greater Bay Area, of the 2,000 quotas, according to the latest information, 170 companies have provided more than 1,100 jobs, and many of them are related to innovation and technology. And this is certainly good news for our youth and university graduates. Mr. Michael Look, Chief Executive, in terms of the working family allowance, I think you should not mix it up with unemployment assistance. When you are unemployed, you will have 0 working hours, so adjustments to the WFA system would not be meaningful unless you allow singletons to apply for unemployment assistance under CSSA. I'm happy to hear that Dr. Long would not be against the idea of an open debate, so we would get in touch with Dr. Long in due course on the details. Mr. Leung Chi-Chang, Chief Executive. District councils are consultative bodies, and they seek to tackle livelihood issues, but the current term district councils have become a political platform for those advocating Hong Kong independence to advocate their views. They sang songs that advocate Hong Kong independence, and they have been promoting Hong Kong independence messages. They have been using their own offices and public money to disseminate and convey such messages. Some district council members have been using the public resources for their own purposes, and Mr. Casper Choi criticized the district councils as losing their function, and they have become a ground for advocating Hong Kong independence. The CE said in her opening address that there will be legislative amendments to incorporate district council members as part of public officers, and they must have to comply with or Article 164 of the Basic Law, 104 of the Basic Law. In terms of the oath taking, how would you verify the sincerity or authenticity of the oath, and how can you ensure that the contents of the oath they take would not be skewed? Would you consider our proposal of a committee to provide oversight on oath taking to ensure the authenticity of the oath taken?
Chief Executive, thank you, Mr. Leung, for your question. As you pointed out, the District Council is just a consultative body at the district level. It does not have any statutory powers. But then over the years, we have very much, respected the district councils because they're able to tell us the community views. So what we've been doing all along is to provide funding to district councils. They could allow, take part in certain district-based work, such as the minor works projects or other small-scale community building projects. But then we have seen that in past years, such work's not been done satisfactorily. And Mr. Leung just mentioned the behavior of certain district councillors. So these is something we need to pay attention to. First, district councillors must know the sort of commitments they've made. Now, when they, join the election, they have to sign a candidate's declaration. That is, I swear that I will uphold the basic law and swear allegiance to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. But then in Article 104 of the Basic Law, district councillors are not covered in relation to the oath-taking requirement. That's why we must first include district councillors in the group of specified public officers who need to take the oath. So that's what we're doing in the legislative exercise. And then after doing that, it will fit in with the requirements of the 2016 interpretation of the National People's Congress Standing Committee. That is, they will then be as public officers who need to take oath, and if they take any acts that breach the oath, they must bear the legal responsibility concerned. So this will be, all these arrangements will be included in the amendment legislation, and then after that it's about enforcement, and of course with enforcement we need to look at evidence. We'll make sure that district councillors act in accordance with the law and with the oath that they've taken in performing their duties. Now, since district councils have become dysfunctional, would you do something such as resuming the certain powers of the district councils that they've not been using properly? For example, for district officers, district councillors' officers, if they put up slogans that are against law, you would then disqualify these district councillors. And also, now the funding applications of certain community groups are denied. So would you therefore take away the district councillors' powers to approve such applications? Well, that's what we're doing exactly in the 18 district offices. That's why some councillors, some members are complaining why we are not approving certain funding applications. That is exactly because the 18 district councils, just officers are working on such matters. Now, after district councillors are made to show the legal responsibility for and the need for them to take oath, then we will proceed with all the relevant arrangement. Dr. Chen Chung-tai. Now, before you reported your work to Beijing via video conference, you first mounted 2 ambush-style the restriction testing declaration, and you have enclosed certain areas. But then so far you've only identified 1 or 2 cases, and you're saying that there are people who are carriers in the community, so you need to mount such operations. So you win either way, even if you couldn't identify cases at the end. Here, we're talking about many residents who are so worried. They don't know when their building or district might be, closed off all of a sudden. Now, there are many people who have to work at night, especially those in the grassroots sector. And then you lock down the area and people are not able to go to work. And then people do not know when the government is going to end such operations. Are we going to wait till there are no more the virus? And we've been asking you all the time. There are so many loopholes in infection control that you wouldn't plug. But just before you reported your work to Beijing, you mounted these operations. Now, these ambush-style lockdown, is it the same as compulsory universal testing in disguise? Chief Executive. Now, Dr. Chang seems to be implying that these measures we're taking are related to my reporting of work to the central authorities, but I can tell you there's no relevance at all between the two. Fighting the virus is something important for Hong Kong, and it's a collective decision. It's nothing to do with my reporting of work to Beijing. Now, the central authorities, of course, care very much about our epidemic situation. They want us to work hard to put the epidemic under control. Now, here we're talking about compulsory testing. That is, we resort to legal means to require a certain group of residents or residents in particular building to take the test. This has been an effective measure. It's through compulsory testing they've managed to identify many positive cases. Now, in recent days, we've opted for the lockdown option, or that's what you say, or what we say is the restricted testing declaration. It's because if we see there are high risk of infection in a particular area, we want to act swiftly and in a targeted manner. So if we're able to identify confirmed cases, then we'll send these people to hospitals for isolation and for treatment, so they won't be spreading the virus in the community. Now, if we manage to identify many cases in such operations, you say these operations are effective. But just because we haven't identified cases, then you're saying these operations are not useful. But I don't think you should look at it this way. Now, about declaring restricted areas is both a scientific decision, but it's not exactly a scientific decision too. Maybe there's silent transmission in the street next by, but it's not covered or it's not specified as a restricted area. It's possible that happens. Now, before Chinese New Year, I think, Chief Secretary, you have promised that you only mount these operations until the 29th day of this lunar month. That is just before Chinese New Year. So now we have started with just one location, but now we're working on 4 locations at any one time. So we hope that through these operations we are able to cut some of the silent transmission chains. Hopefully by the Chinese New Year, people will still refrain from gatherings, and then you could all enjoy a quiet Chinese New Year. If the number of cases drops, then we are able to slowly reopen certain premises and resume economic activities in Hong Kong. Dr. Cheng Chung-tai, I think the biggest problem is that people do not know what you consider to be high-risk areas. I'm not saying that you should just target, the more wealthy neighborhoods. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that it seems that it's those in the grassroots who suffer from your operations. It seems that you are going by classes in your corporations. Say in some districts, people are having parties or enjoying barbecue parties at home. How come you don't target these areas? Is it true that in these areas there is no high risk and you just target residents living in Yau Chim Wong area district? You say you might even make forceful entries into entry into premises. It gives the impression that you are distinguishing people by classes in these operations.
This is certainly not our consideration. One of the factors we look at is environmental hygiene as well as the conditions of buildings, including the conditions of drainage pipes. And very often these problems could be found in old buildings and even private residential buildings. So in terms of mandatory testing in restricted areas, you might say that they took place in older districts, but we looked at factors such as the conditions of buildings, the presence of virus in the sewage tests, etc. So this is nothing about bureaucracy. Earlier, we saw the dancing and singing club clusters, and many of them were subject to testing despite their noble identities. Can we take another question? Mr. Tommy Chang, please. Thank you. The chief executive said they would legislate to introduce non-locally trained doctors. This has been the call of the Liberal Party for more than 10 years, and I believe the whole of Hong Kong would welcome such proposal. But we understand that a minority of doctors in Hong Kong might reject this idea in order to safeguard their own interests, and as such, they would object to such proposal together with doctor organizations. And I urge you to carry out more lobbying together with other EXCO members. When the fourth round of support measures under the Anti-Epidemic Fund was offered to the catering industry, the many people from the trade asked why so little support was given compared with the ESS. And the catering businesses must remain closed for the time being at night, and the scheduled premises would remain closed as well. You are the ultimate decision maker. So are you going to consider rolling out a third phase for the ESS? Many businesses are having a very hard time and they have to repay their loans. As for the subsidy scheme for catering businesses, should we have a fourth round? Like we said, the government would offer or announce a holistic plan in due course. In March or April last year, when we prepared for the employment support scheme, no one could tell that the epidemic would last so long and have such far-reaching consequences on different businesses. And there were calls to help the businesses or industries most in need. And subsequently, in the third and fourth rounds of the AEF, we offered targeted measures. I can say that we will not roll out ESS of that type again, because we should be offering targeted support given restrictions in public finances. And upon assessment, we can decide where the help will go to. Having said that, we hope that such business activities could resume sooner than later, and this would require the cooperation of businesses and the public. I'd like to express my gratitude for premises that were ordered to close they have proactively adopted anti-epidemic measures so that they could continue operation. The efforts certainly would not go down the drains. And when we relax the businesses, eventually we would certainly consider that. Mr. Tommy Chang, Chief Executive, I'm not asking for a refinement on the previous 2 rounds of ESS. And for my industry, as well as the 3 types of scheduled premises and the retail sector, they are under great difficulties. Are you going to indicate when they can reopen? For the exchange fund, they made a profit of some $190 billion. So hopefully you can offer an indication around Lunar New Year when we can reopen again and when you can provide further financial assistance. Under my leadership, the government would do our best in fighting the epidemic and offering support. And having considered views of the public and legislators, we will announce our next budget. This is the end of the question and answer session of the Chief Executive. Members, please rise. Members, this is the final council meeting before the new Lunar New Year. I wish everyone a prosperous year of the ox, as well as health and success. I hope we can step out of the epidemic and to welcome a prosperous new year. I now adjourn the council. The council will resume on the 24th of February at 11 a.m.